folks, welcome to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, your host, and we're in luck because we're going to be speaking to two extension wheat specialists, Dr. Romulo Lollato and Dr. DeWolf, on planting issues coming up this fall. So we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. See you in a minute.
Closed captioning brought to you by Ag Promo Source. Together we grow. Learn more at agpromosource.com.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Good morning, folks. Welcome to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, your host, and with us we have Dr. Romulo Lollato, our extension wheat specialist, and Dr. DeWolf, our extension plant pathologist. Thanks, guys, for being with us this morning. And you know, we're right in wheat planting time now, and I know if people haven't got their varieties selected, they need to. So let's talk a little bit about varieties and in this first segment.
Definitely, Jim. It is important to remember that the choices that producers make now will affect many of the decisions they have to make throughout the growing season. So variety selection being one of the most important choices that producers have to make at this point in time. Whenever we talk about variety selection, a few of the things that are important to keep in mind, number one is yield performance.
Right, that's the big one.
How are these different varieties performing? And we have several tests throughout the state, replicated plots throughout the state, over 20 locations where we're collecting this data and making them available at K-State Agronomy website for producers to look for the nearest location and see how these varieties are performing. This last year was a very good year, for example, in south central Kansas for Zenda, excellent variety, especially following corn because of its heads cap tolerance. Gallagher had an excellent year this year as well.
Oklahoma State
central
variety, right?
Kansas. Yeah. SY Monument as well had an excellent year. So with these, we also have some spread in maturities, as you can see. Zenda being a medium early maturing variety, all the way to Monument being a medium late maturing variety. Right. All of which performed really well this last year. So variety selection based on yield performance, first thing that we want to talk about. And we do again have that resource, those resources available for producers. Second thing that is important for producers to be thinking about, and that will also affect their variety selection, is the cropping system where that variety is going to be put at. So for example, producers who are going to, for example, north central Kansas, where it's very typical to plant soybeans in the summer, harvest and go with a wheat crop later on. The wheat crop's planted late, generally into a dry soil, depleted of moisture and many times even of nutrients early on in the season, because of that high demand in soybean crop. So we need to select our varieties according to that as well. A variety that has an excellent tillering ability if you're going in those conditions, so you still have some time to tiller in the fall. A variety that has a good drought tolerance as well is what we want for in those situations. SY Monument, WB Grainfield have been performing really well when following soybeans in that part of the state.
In that north central area, they've really done well, right?
Exactly. If producers are grazing, we need to look for varieties with good fall forage production and maybe with a slightly later first hollow stem in the spring to give us more days to graze in the fall, or in the spring, sorry. So many of these things producers need to be considering whenever they are selecting their varieties. If they're going after a fallow system that they're looking for more straw production for that no-till system, also maybe look at variety height. That's going to also affect the amount of residue that we'll have left.
Yeah, especially those out in the western part of the state that like the heavy residue, catch snow, keep the wind from blowing everything away.
Exactly. As we go to western Kansas, it becomes more important to look at varieties that have a better straw production. Drought tolerance specifically is very important out in western Kansas as well. So varieties like T158 are still performing relatively well, and many other varieties out of the K-State or Colorado.
We've got to take a break, Romulo. Folks, we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Valley Vet Supply is devoted to providing information and professional quality products at reasonable prices.
ValleyVet.com, ValleyVet.com, Valley Vet Supply.
Soil is the life of a farm, and for 25 years, SureCrop Liquid Crop Nutrition has helped growers produce abundant quality crops while preserving and improving the soils they steward. SureCrop offers complete soil and plant analysis with cropping recommendations, delivery direct to your on-farm storage, and quality crop nutrition custom blended for your field. Choose SureCrop for the assurance of excellence for your soil. Call today or visit their website for more information.
Ag Promo Source is a unique group of marketing specialists with one mission: help your ag business grow. Each affiliate has their own area of expertise, and they work together to bring you advice, products, and services. To get started, visit agpromosource.com. Ag Promo Source. Together we grow.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, and with us we have Romulo Lollato and Eric DeWolf, our extension wheat specialists, one in production, another in plant pathology. Let's continue the thought process on varieties.
Selecting with variety, Jim, another thing that we need to consider is variety maturity.
Right.
We generally recommend producers using variety maturity as a way to spread their risks, right? So remembering that early maturing wheats, they're going to be more likely to get a freeze damage if we do have a freeze in the spring.
Right.
They're going to be so early that any spring freeze might hurt them worse than they would a later maturing wheat, just for differences in maturity. Also, we generally run into hot temperatures, so warm temperatures late in the growing season. And then on the other hand, later maturing wheats would be more exposed to those hot temperatures in the season. Maybe an early maturing wheat might avoid that to some extent.
Right. Of course, this past year we had that freeze out west, or that blizzard out west, hurt the earlier varieties more so than the later varieties. So this was an example that later varieties did better, but they don't necessarily always have to.
Excellent example. The last few years have favored later maturing wheats because we have had cool and moist end of the growing season. Maybe an event like this snowfall hurting the early ones a little bit worse. So using variety maturity as a way to buffer your risk, really spreading your risks there, having some early ones, medium and later maturing varieties, because you never know what the weather is going to turn like.
Right.
Another thing that we need to think about when selecting wheat variety would be their disease resistance.
Right. So now we need to talk to Eric a little bit here. Eric, thanks for hanging around here. So let's talk about variety selections based on disease resistance and maybe fungicide use.
Sure. Well, disease resistance is a major factor that's largely controlled through the genetics of the variety, and that's something that the growers have a chance to pick up now as they're making their variety choices. The choices they make now will influence what diseases, the spectrum of diseases they face, and potentially whether they need a fungicide in the following spring or not. So we might begin to set priorities in some of our disease resistance. So we might, out west, we're going to focus on stripe rust, leaf rust, and wheat streak mosaic wherever possible.
Right.
Kind of the big three out west, as we often describe it. As you move it back into central Kansas, then we start to not only focus on the stripe rust and leaf rust, but we also bring on diseases like barley yellow dwarf, tan spot, and some of the other leaf spotting diseases, such as the septoria complex that we often battle in the central portion of the state as well.
Okay, so let's talk about some varieties. I mean, I guess it's their choice. If they have a high-yielding variety that's susceptible to some of these diseases, they do have the option of using a fungicide. So I guess, you know, if we think about it that way, it opens up the possibilities. But if you're looking for resistance, let's talk a little bit about what varieties have resistance to some of those diseases for central Kansas.
That's right, and as we talk with growers all over the state, we are finding that many growers are very willing to cover up some of those weaknesses with foliar fungicides, so things like stripe rust or leaf rust. We do know we have some susceptibility, and growers can use foliar fungicides, as you mentioned, to cover up that weakness. If you're not interested in using foliar fungicides, if you're concerned about wheat budgets this next year, then I'd certainly direct you towards trying to pick the more resistant varieties. And as you had mentioned a moment ago, there's a few that are out there now. So out west, TM114, Grainfield, WB Grainfield, SY Monument might be some of the top tier type of varieties that right now have good resistance to some of those diseases. In the more central portion of the state, we might look to some new K-State wheats. Zenda, for example, would be a pretty good option, as well as the SY Monument we had mentioned previously.
Okay, Eric, we got to take a break. Stay with us. Folks, stay with us. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. See you in a minute.
Grain sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org. Tarwater Farm and Home has been family owned and operated since its beginning in 1978. What you need for farm and agriculture, lawn and garden, clothing and footwear, and so much more. You'll be surprised at what you'll find in this huge store. They have what you need and lots of it. So come take a look. You'll discover that customer service is first and foremost. Always has been with the Tarwaters. Tarwater Farm and Home, 4107 North Topeka Boulevard.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back to That's My Farm. I'm Jim Shroyer, and we have two extension specialists here that didn't run off during the break, and I always appreciate that, guys, not running off. Eric, let's finish up a little bit on diseases and variety selection in diseases.
So I think there's a couple other factors to consider here as well. And there are some other diseases, as we mentioned, that would be top priorities. In the central portion of the state, we might look at disease resistance, trying to help us out with problem viral diseases such as barley yellow dwarf. Barley yellow dwarf resistance, kind of the best available that we've had for a long time, has been in the variety Everest. Everest is still a top variety in the state. And
it has lots of other problems. Fungicides help there, but
it does have some other problems. And Everest has an overall pretty solid disease package. Stripe rust has been the Achilles heel of Everest in recent years. But its barley yellow dwarf resistance has gotten it through some tough years. Fusarium resistance, Hessian fly resistance, and some of those pieces are still there and intact in the Everest.
Especially in the central and in the eastern part of the state.
That's right. So that's where the eastern and central portion of the state is where those diseases would be particularly problematic. We also have the new K-State variety. We mentioned Zenda a few moments ago, and Zenda is also has some stripe rust resistance that would address some of the issues that we've come to expect with the Everest. But it also has comparable levels of barley yellow dwarf resistance and resistance to Fusarium head blight or head scab. So those would be some real pluses in going with a variety like Zenda, particularly for the Fusarium when planted into corn residue, where that Fusarium fungus often persists right in that corn residue.
What about viral diseases out in the West?
Thanks, Romulo.
Yeah, another excellent question. And with the problems we've had with wheat streak mosaic this last year in western Kansas, that's been a question that's been really frequent this year coming from growers out west. For many years we haven't had much to work with as far as viral disease resistance out west. A lot of our varieties were in the ranges of 6 to 7, moderately susceptible to wheat streak mosaic. But we do have a few varieties now that are pretty consistently in the 2 to 3 range, which indicates a much higher level of genetic resistance to our to wheat streak mosaic and some of those other diseases. So in the red wheats, it's going to be Oakley CL out of the Hayes breeding program for K-State, and a white wheat Joe would probably be the top 2 varieties we might look at, both with higher levels of genetic resistance. But remember that genetic resistance isn't perfect. It's going to have some temperature sensitivity, and then also it may not offer complete protection against the full complex of diseases that are spread by wheat curl mite. So remember, in addition to wheat streak mosaic, there's triticum mosaic and high plains mosaic as well. So depending on the genetic background that some of that wheat streak resistance is crossed into, it may or may not provide us complete protection. So after the resistance to the wheat streak mosaic, we might also look at resistance to some of the wheat curl mite, and that's going to be available in varieties like TAM112 that have been around for a while. Some of the derivatives of TAM112 like Bird and Avery also have some resistance to the wheat curl mite. And remember, the wheat curl mite is important in the context of these viral diseases because it's those little wheat curl mites that spread the wheat streak mosaic virus or carry it around from field to field. So keeping those mite populations low through that curl mite resistance does in fact help slow the spread of disease. Maybe the last one we would mention that's also popular out west, holds some significant acreage in the west central southwest, would be a variety T158.
Right.
Had some good success in some dry years, also come through some higher disease pressure years. So T158 holds some ground, and probably for a good reason out west.
Thanks, Eric. We've got to take a break. Folks, we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan is rediscovering ways to get improved varieties and new genetics in the hands of farmers faster. Grower-led and checkoff-funded research initiatives are bringing about positive change. This grassroots leadership provides a strong voice in Topeka and Washington, D.C. Now is the time to partner with Kansas Wheat in moving wheat forward. Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Farmers investing in their future and yours. Log on to rediscoverwheat.org.
Kansas Farm Bureau, the voice of agriculture, represents grassroots agriculture. The state's largest and most powerful farm organization stands up for its members through leadership development, agriculture education, legal defense, environmental advocacy, farm safety, and risk management. Members also enjoy money-saving benefits. To join our organization today or to learn more, go to www.kfb.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back to That's My Farm. With us we have Dr. Eric DeWolf and Romulo Lollato. Eric, let's talk a little bit about seed treatments. I know sometimes that's a big question. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it doesn't do any good. Give us an update on seed treatments.
So fungicide seed treatments historically in the Kansas maybe have not gotten as much use as we see in other parts of the country. And I think that's something that I'd like to see slowly change over the years, primarily because of some seed-borne diseases that can be very effectively controlled with these fungicide seed treatments. So diseases like loose smut that causes black powdery spores that completely replace the head parts, or common bunt, a disease also known as stinking smut. And then in the last couple of years, we've also seen very low levels of a disease called flag smut that have emerged or reemerged in different parts of the state as well.
Right. So seed treatments do a real good job on those.
They do. These fungicide seed treatments, most of them that are widely available, will provide very good to excellent control of these seed-borne diseases, these smuts and bunt diseases. And so by very good, we mean 98, 99% control. So they're not going to be perfect, and that largely depends on coverage that you're going to get of those seed. But they are very effective tools at trying to keep these seed-borne diseases at bay.
Okay. What are some other reasons that you would use a seed treatment?
So fungicide seed treatments are also going to help suppress some of the seedling diseases or seedling emergence problems that can also plague our wheat as well. So getting a good stand can also be important. Now here kind of comes the rub with the fungicide seed treatments is that wheat that is known to suffer some stand loss has the ability to compensate through additional tillering or stooling out in the fall. So as long as that loss of stand remains relatively uniform, the remaining plants can somewhat compensate for the stand loss. So when wheat is planted under ideal planting conditions, it's rapid to emerge, good tillering conditions. It's sometimes difficult for us in our trials to show differences in the yield improvements. But when wheat's pushed outside those boundaries, and
like an early planting or possibly a late planting?
That's right. So when we push wheat planting a little bit early, or we're going to push it a little bit late, particularly in that late situation where we're maybe planting late after soybeans and into cool, wet soils where wheat's ability to compensate through for stand loss through additional tillering is compromised, every seed now counts. Every plant is going to be more and more important, and fungicide seed treatments can play an important role in making sure we get good stands in those difficult production environments.
I've always heard, early planted for grazing, that might be a good time because the ground's maybe warmer and that may cause some other issues?
I think so. So I think another time that we see a wheat sometimes struggle with its growth and development is in those early planted warm soil type of situations. And I think the fungicide treatments may also play a role there at making sure you've got a good stand that's ready for grazing when you need it.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
There's a lot of different ways of doing this woodwork, but all of it still takes both hands.
He had been told that by the orthopedic specialist in Enid, Oklahoma, that they would have to fuse his thumb.
And I said, no, cut it off, because I didn't want it sticking up. And I found out about the Kansas regenerative stem cell and went to Manhattan.
We were so impressed with how royally we were treated the first time we came to Kansas Regenerative.
We came in and he took out the stem cells. It took about an hour for him to process them before they put him back in my knees and my thumb. And we were out of here in about 4 hours and on our way back home. And I'm in here today to have my shoulders, my hips, and my back done. So I'll be able to go back to my sawmill, my shop, and do about anything I want to do.
That's My Farm is brought to you in part by Tallgrass Commodities. Big enough to serve, small enough to care.
Welcome back after that break. I'm Jim Shroyer, and with us we have Romulo Lollato and Eric DeWolf. Romulo, let's talk a little bit about nitrogen management, because there's still time to think about a pre-plant or putting it on at planting time, and then top dress later on.
Definitely, Jim. So whenever we talk about nitrogen management, a few of the things that I like to talk about, one is nitrogen rate, right? What rate should producers be thinking about? Another one, timing as well, timing of the nitrogen application. We can discuss some on sources as well, but let's focus on maybe rate and timing here. On nitrogen rate, producers need to remember that's going to be tightly related to their yield potential, to their yield goal, right? SK State, we generally recommend about 2.4 pounds of nitrogen per bushel per acre of yield goal. And then we give credits to whatever nitrogen is in the soil profile. We also give
Now, you're talking about 2.4 total, and then give what's in the soil minus that, right? Subtract that. Okay.
So if your yield potential maybe is 40, that's going to put you close to 100 pounds of N there. But then you give credit to whatever nitrogen you have in the profile, whatever organic matter mineralization is going to come out of that organic matter as well, and previous crop and other credits as well. Now, the 2.4 is also because for us to produce a bushel of wheat at 12.5% protein, we need about 1.2 pounds of N. We're going to export about 1.2 pounds of N. We're not too efficient when putting that fertilizer out, many cases, so roughly 50% efficient there, and that's where our 2.4 comes from. Now, producers can be more efficient on that, especially if we work on timing, right? Nitrogen timing. So another question that comes out a lot is, okay, as far as timing, can I put everything up front, maybe using anhydrous, maybe a cheaper source of nitrogen, and it is really cheap lately, so that question's coming out a lot. And that's a tricky question there, because at the same time that, okay, we might get everything up front here, it might be excellent for a grazing situation where you're going to have a lot of that forage that you want that forage produced. It becomes not as efficient if you're in a grain-only situation, especially because you might end up with too much growth and using that water early on and running into a water deficit later on, just because we use too much water off that via that extra biomass. That
in the fall or early winter.
In the fall, exactly. So splitting the nitrogen application at least into an early application, we're going to ensure enough fall tillering out there, maybe 30-40 pounds of N in the fall to ensure enough nitrogen for fall tillering, and then having the bulk of that application later in the spring, so early spring there, maybe late winter, early spring, depending on soil texture as well. If you have a fine textured, well-drained soil, it's okay to go maybe January, early February. Now, if we're more exposed to losses, like if we have a sandier soil, that we're more exposed to leaching, or a soil that has water logging frequently, that we have more denitrification, then we can either even split that spring application into two different timings, one mid-winter and then another one closer to green up, or do the bulk of it closer to green up. But the importance of having that nitrogen in the root zone by green up is that that's when we're going to determine our head size, by how many meshes per header we're going to have. And that's determined really early, in between green up and about first node. So that's why we need to have that nitrogen in the root zone whenever we're determining that head size.
Thank you. Appreciate
Jim.
taking time, Romulo. Eric, appreciate it. Folks, thanks for being with us on this issue of That's My Farm. Don't forget, next week about this same time, we'll have another one. See you then.
Closed captioning brought to you by Ag Promo Source. Together we grow. Learn more at agpromosource.com.